The session's about Windows 10 deployment, really kind of the laundry list of what's new in Windows 10. I'm Mike Niehaus, Director of Product Marketing for Windows Deployment and Servicing and a few other things. So we really just want to kind of jump into it. To get started, we should probably just mention a few things about Windows 10 16.07. If you missed it, it was released back in August. We did announce that it was declared as a current branch or business release on November 29th. The new bits for that, which really are just the original 14.393 build plus the November cumulative update, were pushed out to Windows Update and WSUS yesterday. So you would see that syncing now into your environment. We'll have updated media on the Volume License Service Center on the 26th, which is next week. And that will then start the 60-day grace period for Windows 10 15.07, which is the N-2 release. It won't be serviced after late March of this year. So that will be the first Windows 10 release that drops off of the supported list. Windows 10 Enterprise LTSB 2016 came out at the same time. On August the 2nd was its official release. The bits weren't actually available on VLSC, the ISOs, until October for administrative reasons. They were available on MSDN and other places before that. There are requirements for new KMS hotfixes and KMS activation keys if you're going to use LTSB 2016 with an older Windows Server KMS. So look at those hotfixes. Those hotfixes are only available for Server 2012 and above. So if you have a KMS on Server 2008 or 2008 R2, it's time to upgrade. Since 2008 R2 is in extended support, we're not adding new functionality to 2008 R2. Adding support for new operating systems in KMS is considered new functionality, so it's kind of against the purpose of extended support. There are two separate hotfixes, one that for 2012 and 2012 R2, one added initial support for Windows 10. The second one then adds support for LTSB 2016. You do need to install both of them if you're building a new server. You can't just install the second one. The second one builds on the first one, so you had to install that first. So that's enough on kind of the administrivia around Windows 10 16.07. Let's start going through some conceptual items and some specifics around that. First, talking about deployment choices. When we talk about deploying Windows 10, we can do this in a few different ways. We can do it the modern way. You've heard us talking about provisioning. Now we kind of talk about that as a modern deployment mechanism. In that modern mechanism, we're talking about taking new devices and transforming them from whatever was shipped on them from the OEM into a ready-to-use enterprise device. So we want to kind of bootstrap the device into an enterprise-ready PC. We want to minimize the amount of time and effort put into that. So no images, no extensive customization, just enough configuration to get the PC to the point where it's managed by a mobile device management service or config manager or whatever it is. So bootstrap it to that point and then let the management tool take over the ongoing maintenance of that particular PC. That's kind of the future direction. We want to move toward that, and there are plenty of organizations making that move. In the short term, doing that in cooperation with the OEMs, where the OEMs provide a clean PC image with no extra bloatware so that you can use that as a good starting point to then customize the PC. As we move forward, we'll talk a little bit more about ways that you can get around the bloatware issue that we're working on, but it's still easiest to start with a clean PC and then build up from there. For existing PCs, we want to be able to upgrade them. So in-place upgrade is the preferred mechanism to go from Windows 7, 8.1, or previous Windows 10 releases to get to the current Windows 10 release. So we want to use that to let Windows do all the work so that we don't need to build out these more complex traditional deployment mechanisms. That's not to say that you can't do a traditional deployment. You can certainly do that. And a lot of companies will do that to get from Windows 7 or 8.1 to Windows 10. but you can't really do that to stay current with Windows 10 because doing that every 6 months just really isn't practical. So let's talk more about upgrades. When we're talking about upgrades, we first need to kind of start off with scenarios where you don't want to use an upgrade because it's not supported. Things like x86 to x64. If you're currently running Windows 7 x86 and you want to move to Windows 10 x64, you can't do that via an in-place upgrade. That has to be a wipe and load. If you're using Windows to go, it's not upgradable, period. So you have to build a new Windows to go stick. If you're using boot from VHD, same thing. You had to build a new VHD and then flip over to the new operating system. Dual boot and multi-boot systems, upgrade them at your own risk. We don't test those scenarios, so there's no guarantee that the other operating systems on the machine will still boot after you go through an upgrade process. It'll probably work. It'll probably upgrade successfully, but you may need to do some manipulation of the boot configuration afterwards to get that to work. Some third-party disk encryption products can get in the way of in-place upgrades. Some have done the necessary work to integrate with the upgrade process. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Now, there are two that are on here that I've crossed off. When we initially talked about this 24 months ago, changing from legacy BIOS to UEFI wasn't something you could do as part of an in-place upgrade. And technically, you still can't do it as part of an in-place upgrade itself, but you can do it right after. So you can take a Windows 7 x64 PC, upgrade it to Windows 10 x64, still using BIOS emulation, then run the OEM utility to reconfigure it for UEFI, and use a new tool that we'll be releasing that will convert the existing MBR disk to a GPT disk. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So as a result of that, we can scratch that one from the list. If you do want to go from BIOS to UEFI so that you can take advantage of secure boot and other Windows 10 security capabilities tied to UEFI, you can do that now. The other limitation was that if you were trying to do an in-place upgrade of a golden image and then sysprep and recapture that, that wasn't supported. With Windows 10 1607, it is now. So you can take a Windows 7, Windows 8.1, or Windows 10, say 1507 PC, upgrade it to Windows 10 1607, sysprep it, capture it as a whim, and deploy it. I wouldn't recommend it. It's not necessarily a good idea, but it is at least possible. So then let's go through a few of these items in more detail. First, on third-party disk encryption. It was kind of painful with the Windows 10, 1511, and 1507 releases to do this because you had to modify the boot WIM and the install.wim with extensive vendor instructions on how to mount the WIMs and inject drivers and do all kinds of weird stuff. With Windows 10 1607, that's been greatly simplified so that you can create a folder with the necessary files and then just tell setup where to find that folder. It will take the folder and inject it as it's doing the upgrade, so as a result, you don't need to do any modifications. The best part about that, if you remember the discussion around ISO media versus ESD files in the previous session, you couldn't modify the ESD file. So if you were doing upgrades using WSUS or config manager servicing, doing this for third-party encryption software just wasn't a possibility. Now you can do that by creating a setup config.ini file, putting it in a known location on the hard drive, and including in there a command line switch that tells setup where to find the files. So then you can still do the upgrade via WSUS or config manager servicing. It will find that setup config.ini file and append those command line switches to the command that it runs to do the upgrade, injecting the necessary drivers. There are, I think at last count, 6 different, well, at least that we know of, 6 different ISVs who have published the necessary files and instructions for doing this. They'll provide you with the zip file containing the necessary files, and they tell you what you need to do as far as setting this whole up. But it at least makes it doable for those of you who aren't using BitLocker that are using something else. Now, if you're using BitLocker, You don't have to worry about it because the upgrade process will automatically suspend the BitLocker protection, do the upgrade, and then re-enable it when it's done. You might have seen the news reports around people complaining about that because BitLocker is suspended. So as a result, during the upgrade, the hard drive is accessible and the Shift F10 command prompt support is enabled. So people would be able to, if they happen to be sitting in front of the PC at the time that it's upgrading, hit Shift F10, do things like add themselves into the administrators group and take over the PC. It's not really a security vulnerability because it does require physical access to the machine and some pretty good timing to know when that PC is going to upgrade. But with the next Windows 10 feature update release, the Creators Update later this spring, we will disable Shift F10 by default, which will make it a whole lot harder to take advantage of that. But it still will be, if you're using BitLocker, it will still suspend the protectors. So as a result, for the duration of the upgrade, the hard drive is not protected. The contents of the drive would be accessible. So if someone were smart enough to be able to see that happening, insert a USB key, boot into Windows PE, they could grab content off of the drive. We suspect that that's the case with most third-party tools as well. When they integrate into the upgrade process as well, in order for that process to work, they need to suspend their own protection. So we don't think this is a BitLocker only thing. We think that this is probably a common implementation requirement for these types of tools in order to make this work. We have some challenges around language packs, because when you do an upgrade from Windows 7, 8.1, or a previous Windows 10 release, multiple language packs will be discarded. So if you have a machine that's core English with 5 different language packs installed, after the upgrade, all it's going to have is English. So as a result, you had to reinstall the 5 other language packs. You can provide a folder to set up telling it, here are the language packs that I want you to reinstall, and it'll take care of doing that for you. So you would have to pre-build that folder and then either build a setupconfig.ini file with the install language pack switch in it, or you would have to provide command line switches. So if you're doing a task sequence, you can provide a /install lang pack command line switch and point to a folder that contains them as well. The process for building that setupconfig.ini is not hard, it just requires some pre-processing. If I can remember my password. So if I look at a PC here, I have this folder, C users default app data local Microsoft Windows WSUS. Doesn't exist by default, you have to create the WSUS folder, but inside of that I can create a setupconfig.ini file. That setupconfig.ini file, you can put whatever command line switches in there that you want. They're not specified as command line switches, they're specified ini file style, so it's switch name equals whatever value. But you can provide those switches then to the upgrade process. It will look for this file, and when it finds it, append them to any other command line switches that it's processing. So in this case, I said install lang packs equals C:\lang packs, and I pre-created that on this machine. If we look at that folder, it contains a subfolder called ESES, which, not surprisingly, contains an lp.cab for Spanish. So as a result, setup as part of the upgrade would find the language pack, install it, and the machine would then restore that. We are looking at ways both within Windows as well as with Config Manager to simplify that setup, because most multinational companies have a core image that hopefully has just a single language, because this gets really messy if you have an English image and a Spanish image and a Russian image, because then you need to upgrade with English media and Spanish media and Russian media. Whereas if you use the same core language, at least all you have to worry about is layering language packs on top of it. But we do want to simplify the process of figuring out what language packs need to be put back. Today, if you had different language packs on different machines, you had to run some sort of custom scripting to figure out what language packs do I need? Then build a folder containing just those language packs and then pass that folder along. So we do want to simplify that, but at this point, you can at least build a folder containing all the language packs that you want and pass that to setup, and it'll take care of it. Drivers can be handled the same way. If for some reason you need to specify additional drivers to the upgrade process, you can create a folder containing those drivers. Most of the time, the drivers that are in the image that's being deployed, being used for the upgrade, most of the time those will be used. If there isn't an inbox driver available in that image, it will pull forward the drivers from the currently running OS. Whether that's Windows 7, 8.1, Windows 10, doesn't matter. It'll pull it forward just to make sure that it has a driver. It will try to get updated drivers from Windows Update if dynamic update is enabled and the machine is able to get to the Windows Update service. So it will pull down later drivers like that. For a lot of enterprises, that isn't going to work because they have Windows Update pointing to a WSUS server, and that WSUS server doesn't have drivers. So dynamic update, therefore, doesn't work. So as a result, there may be some scenarios where you want to provide additional drivers for setup to consider over and beyond what's included in box and what's on the current OS. So you can build a folder for setup and pass that along to it. The challenge with the question was if you're using Config Manager and you have catalogs provided by the vendor that you're tying into SCUP, could you use those? You would probably need to extract the contents of whatever packaging those drivers were included in because setup just wants raw drivers. But if you had a driver package that you created in Config Manager with the drivers that you wanted for a particular model, the Config Manager team added a new step for the task sequences in Config Manager Current Branch to download the contents of a driver package. And once you've downloaded that to a location locally on the drive, it will set a task sequence variable saying where that was downloaded to. You can then dynamically build that command line and point setup to the folder that contains that. So it works fine with driver packages, it just may not work with the SCUP-based content. Again here, because we're using ESDs with Windows 10 servicing in Config Manager or with WSUS, we can use setup config.ini. It is still going to follow the normal driver ranking rules, so if you provide a folder with lower ranking drivers than what's included in box, it's still going to pick the inbox driver if that's what has the highest rank. So it just gives you the option of specifying additional drivers. It's not necessarily considered an override for the drivers that are in box. But hopefully, if you're running into issues with an inbox driver, the fixed driver is a newer driver than what's in box rather than an older driver compared to what's in box. I mentioned dynamic update. The whole upgrade process is designed to be dynamic. That's why it's called dynamic update. It goes out to Windows Update multiple times and retrieves extra stuff. It will download new setup binaries. It will download an additional cumulative update. It will download an updated compatibility database. It will download updated drivers. So it gathers all of this stuff from Windows Update and then initiates the upgrade to make sure you have the highest probability of success when you're doing these upgrades. You get all the latest fixes. But if you're using WSUS or Config Manager, you point your machines away from Windows Update, and as a result, you can't get any of that stuff. So that is a challenge. Config Manager does provide the ability to enable dynamic update, but it does that just by temporarily redirecting the policy on the machine out to WU. Then it does the upgrade, and then it points it back to WSUS, which is better than nothing, but it does mean that all of those machines will go out and download anywhere from, say, 500 meg to a gigabyte worth of stuff from Windows Update to get the latest and greatest before it does the upgrade. We're still looking at ways to simplify that so that we can get all of that content into WSUS so that the machines can get it from WSUS instead. We haven't completely figured out how to do that yet, so there is still some work for us to do there to get that fully working. The size challenges we talked about earlier, feature updates can be 3.5 gigabytes, 2.5 gigabytes if you're using ESD files. The monthly patches grow over time. They can easily get above a gigabyte for the monthly patches. We do recommend using peer-to-peer distribution tools, using express updates, and in the future we'll enable differential upgrade support. We talked about the differential upgrade support earlier today. We'll go over it again here just for completeness, where we have the 3.5 gig media, the ISO files that you can download from VLSC. If you're using the files from Windows Update or from WSUS or with the Windows 10 servicing and config manager, then you're using ESD files, electronic software distribution files. Instead of being 3.5 gig, those are only 2.5 gig. They're compressed differently, so that compression makes them a whole lot smaller. So 30% savings just by doing that. What we want to enable later this year is a differential upgrade capability that will only download the portions of that ESD file for files that have changed since the OS release that you're running. In order to make this work, we need to have a baseline OS installed first. That baseline OS is the Windows 10 Creators Update. That's why this doesn't work until the update after that. So the new feature update that comes out later in 2017 will be able to compare against what it knows the original Creators Update was and just download the changed files to the PC. We think that'll shave about 35% out of the download. It will download all the pieces that it needs and then go through the same upgrade process that it goes through today with the same 30 to 90 minute process. So it doesn't really change the mechanism that's used. The only thing that changes is the download to get the bits locally before the upgrade process is initiated. But with that 35% savings, then instead of 2.5 gig, we're down to about 1.8 gig. So the question was, can you leverage those ESD files in a config manager task sequence? No, there isn't today, but if you look on the config manager user voice site, I added an entry in there to add support for ESD files to config manager task sequences. Go out there and vote that one up. It's gathered a few hundred votes already, so the config manager team has noticed. They're just still having that debate among themselves as to what's the best approach for doing that. Should they try to invest more in the Windows 10 servicing approach and provide, say, pre and post processing script capabilities tied into that? Or is it better to add ESD support into the task sequence so that you then have a very robust pre and post processing capability, but you get the benefits of ESD files inside the task sequence? So they're still debating. There are pros and cons both ways. Personally, I'd prefer plenty of options. So from my perspective, hey, do both, make everyone happy. But they're still debating that one now. So that's what we want to get to later in 2017, doing the differential upgrade to reduce the download sizes. The ESD files themselves, what goes out to the distribution points, of course, will still be the full size, the full 2.5 gigabyte size. It will just only download the byte ranges for the files that have changed. When we look at monthly patches, the quality updates that go out for Windows 10, these are also a challenge. Today they grow every month because they're fully cumulative. If you're using something other than Windows Update for Business, and WSUS, all of which support express updates, you have to download that full package every month in order to install it. So if you're deploying packages with Config Manager, deploying updates using Config Manager, with Windows 10, after about a year, you get up to about the gigabyte size. Each PC, each month, is going to download a gigabyte worth of stuff just to install about 100 meg delta. Once you enable express updates, then you get to a nice small size. That's what the shorter bars are, where you only have, on average, about 100 megabytes per month downloaded to each PC. That's much more doable. 100 megabytes per PC is about what you're used to today with Windows 7. A gigabyte per PC is much more than what you're used to today with Windows 7. So we're working on that one. We first had to add support into Windows 10 to enable that. So we had in the January cumulative update that went out on Patch Tuesday this month, we added the ability in Windows 10 for management tools to install Express updates. The Config Manager team added support for doing that in Config Manager 16.10, the client-side pieces. They're going to release probably next month a hotfix for Config Manager 16.10 that enables the GUI configuration options to turn this on. So it's not currently enabled in Windows 10 16.10, or sorry, in Config Manager 16.10. It is enabled in the Config Manager Tech Preview 16.12. So if we look at that one, we can actually see the UI options that they've added. If I can find my Config Manager server, which I just upgraded this morning. They released that support while I was out on vacation. So I came back to find a new Config Manager Tech Preview build available, and it has two new options. First, on the software update point component properties, the options are to download full files for approved updates, and the second option, download both full files and Express installation files for Windows 10. Now, Express installation files are much smaller for the clients to download. They're only going to be supported with Windows 10 because only Windows 10 has the necessary support to expose that to Config Manager. But those Express installation files are much bigger. In the case of the Windows 10 packages, say a gigabyte package for an update after about a year, the Express package equivalent to that could easily be 4 gigabytes, 5 gigabytes. It's going to contain deltas for every single version of the file that we've ever released. So they're much bigger to download and to keep on your DPs, but they're much smaller to download to the clients. So you're trading disk space and the initial download size and distribution size for a much more scalable mechanism for deploying those out to the PCs. So you have to consciously opt into this. You have to enable this to say, I want Express installation files. If you're using WSUS, there's a similar checkbox in WSUS. The challenge in WSUS is when you check the box, it's all or nothing. Not just for Windows 10, it's Windows 10, Windows 8.1, Windows 7, server OSs. You get Express updates for everything. So your WSUS server is going to go from, if it's 20 gig today, it might be 100 gig after enabling Express updates. But you have to turn that on, so that's the first piece. And once you turn that on, you then have to enable it in client settings. So if we look at the client settings in Config Manager for software updates, there's an option here to enable installation of Express updates on clients. We can say yes. And then there's also a port number that you can configure, because the Config Manager agent, when you enable this, kind of sets itself up as a HTTP proxy for the web content for Express updates. So as far as the Windows Update agent is concerned, it's talking to a local host web server, and that local host web server redirects that traffic to the Config Manager distribution point to download the actual pieces. That's where that port number comes in. That's the port that it's listening on. So there are a couple of options that you'll have to configure to enable that. But once that's enabled, Windows 10 16.07, as long as it's running at least the January update, will be able to install the 100 megabytes per month instead of the gigabyte per month. Peer-to-peer obviously is recommended as well. We talked about that earlier as well. Branch cache works with WSUS and Config Manager. Delivery optimization works with Windows Update for Business and WSUS, actually. If you are using WSUS by itself today, on Windows 10, you'll see that the PC will scan against WSUS, but before it goes to download the update from WSUS, it will first try to go out to the delivery optimization service on the internet, and it will ask it if there are any peers that it can get that content from instead. If there are, it will then reach out to those peers on your internal network and get the content from those peers before it falls back to the WSUS server to download it from there. So it's trying its best to do peer-to-peer distribution within your network using just WSUS or Windows Update. Config Manager also added their own Config Manager peer caching, so you can use that to do peer-to-peer distribution. If you've got third-party products in place hooked into Config Manager, there's a couple of them out there, they do a pretty good job of this as well, so they can be used to help with this problem too. One other challenge with Windows 10 is when you install a new feature update, the inbox apps come back, which is, I think I said in a blog post somewhere that it's irritating, and my boss's boss took exception to that, so I had to change the word irritating to less than optimal or something like that. But the apps come back. So we're working on that problem, but it's going to take us a couple of releases to really get that fixed right. In the meantime, there are some workarounds. I blogged on the details of that. The easiest way is just run a script again after the upgrade and remove them again. As long as you do that before the user signs back in, it doesn't really cost anything because the apps install at user login. That's one option. If you are using media, you can modify the install.wim by mounting it and then removing the apps. Or there's a few other options for doing that as well. But the blog goes through all of the options there. The Windows 10 Creators Update that comes out this spring will be able to keep user uninstalled apps from coming back. So if the user signed in and saw that there's the Xbox app and they didn't want it and they uninstalled it, well, after they install a feature update, the Xbox app will still be gone. But if you as an IT pro deprovisioned the Xbox app and then install the Creators Update, guess what? The Xbox app is going to come back for all users again. That requires some additional work. We first need to be able to keep track of what apps have been deprovisioned, so that work is in the Creators Update, and then the subsequent feature update after that will be able to see the list of what's been removed so that it doesn't put those back again. So that will be in place later in 2017 with the next feature update. So we'll get that done in 2 pieces. Now, the process of removing them is not too bad. You can do that using PowerShell. So if we look at my server here, I've mounted the install.wim, and with that mounted, I can now get a list, get AppX provision package from edemo mount. So we can get a list of the provisioned apps that are included in the OS, and for any of those, we can actually remove them. So maybe we want to remove Zune Music, so we could do where the display name, if I could type, equals Microsoft.Zune Music. Always good to make sure that works first. Okay, that gives me one app, and then I can pipe that into remove AppX provision package path edemo mount. So that's all it takes to remove the provisioned applications. You just need to specify which one you want to remove with the mounted WIM and then commit the changes. So the question was, could we provide an ISO for enterprise that doesn't have those integrated in the first place? We've asked multiple times and been told no multiple times by executives fairly high up in the organization. So the last time we asked, they told us to stop asking. So not right at the moment. So as a result, you had to remove them. but at least we'll make it better over time, so it won't be as big of a deal. Settings always get migrated as part of the installation of a feature update. So we're always going through the process of capturing all the settings, data, and apps from the current OS, laying down a new operating system image, and then migrating them all back into that new operating system. There are some things that we can miss as part of that process. So it's not 100%, it's 99.7%. But we want it to be better. We want it to be unnoticeable. We don't want default applications to change. We don't want any settings to change. We want it to feel like just a big patch was installed. So if you do see any cases where settings aren't migrated, let us know, open a support case, we'll fix those. We consider all of those bugs and we want to get those resolved. The one that I always made fun of was you could do an upgrade to the latest feature update and it forgot the state of the caps lock key. I mean, it's a trivial issue, but for people who are used to the caps lock key being in a certain state or the numlock key being in a certain state, after the upgrade, they expect it to still be in that state. Well, it took us a while, but we finally fixed that bug, so now we will properly migrate the state of the caps lock and numlock keys between feature upgrades to make sure that it's as seamless as possible. But that's not to say that you won't find other issues like that. Just let us know when you do, and we'll see if we can take care of those quickly. In the monthly patches, we tend to fix a lot of those types of issues. So that's another downside of not having dynamic update working for those that are using WSS or Config Manager. As you go through the upgrade process, you're not getting the latest fixes where we may have already addressed some of these issues. That's the reason why we want to work more on dynamic update to get that enabled. It is possible to do a pre-flight check to see if the upgrade will succeed. I did a blog on this a while back. You can just run setup.exe auto upgrade, compat scan only, quiet, and it will go through the motions of figuring out, would this upgrade succeed? So it'll do the normal compatibility checks, disk space checks, everything except doing the actual upgrade. So it'll abort before it gets to that particular phase. The only downside of doing this is if you wanted to do this with Config Manager, don't use download and execute on the Config Manager package to do this, because it downloads the full package, including the install.wim, and then when it's done, throws it away. It needs the install.wim. It validates that that's there, and it uses that to figure out how much disk space is needed. It doesn't actually read it because it doesn't get that far into the process, but it has to be there. But if you use an advertisement or a deployment from Config Manager that's configured to run from DP, it can use all the media off of the distribution point and not download it at all. So all of that's covered in the blog. You can go through that. The BIOS to UEFI item that I talked about before, we have a new tool in the Windows 10 Creators Update called MBR to GPT. It's an executable that will convert an existing disk from MBR to GPT, obviously, from the name of the executable. That can be used as part of a deployment process combined with vendor tools to reconfigure an existing PC from BIOS to UEFI and then convert the disk from MBR to GPT and then do a single reboot, and now the PC is running in UEFI natively. As a result, then you can turn on secure boot and you can start taking advantage of those new capabilities. So we've taken care of that one piece of it, being able to convert the disk. The OEM tools are required to do the other piece of it. So for every make of machine, you probably will need to use a different utility to do that type of configuration. There are some partners out there that have done a lot of work with HP and Dell and Lenovo and others to figure out how their tools work and to kind of abstract that process so that you can just have say a single task sequence step that you could run to switch from BIOS to UEFI and then add in this utility to take care of the disk portion of it, and now you have a full end-to-end process. So that's included in the current Insider Preview builds. It's included in the full OS, so you can actually run MBR to GPT if you're running 15007 or above, and it'll give you the command line syntax for doing that. So that's good. That enables the customers who want to be able to take advantage of the Windows 10 features around security and UEFI without having to go through a much more convoluted process. Without something like this, the process that you need to use requires capturing all the data from the existing OS, pushing it off to the network, then pixie booting the machine or having some other way to kick off a second task sequence that paves the machine, reconfigures it, then pulls all the data back down along with an operating system image. So it's much faster, much more efficient to keep all that locally and convert the disk in place. So that's good. That tool will help out with that process. We have added a new active hours policy. So if you're using Windows Update for Business, or WSUS, this policy lets you control when the PC will reboot. So you could specify that the PC is normally in use between, say, 5 a.m. and 8 p.m., and as a result, it will wait until after 8 p.m. to try to reboot it. That's kind of useful. We've added new Windows Update for Business policies to make them more granular. With Windows 10 15.11, you could specify either current branch or current branch for business to defer or to not defer. And then if you chose current branch for business, you could defer updates for 1 to 4 weeks and feature updates for 1 to 8 months, I think. With 1607, now you can separate those to be able to specify CB versus CBB, and then for each specify the number of days that you want to defer. So you could say CB plus 20 days, CBB plus 37 days, both for the patches and for the feature updates. So a lot more flexibility in those configurations. Now those new policies only apply for upgrades from 1607 to the next release, just like the 1511 policies only applied for 1511 to 1607. So these are future-looking policies for the creators update and subsequent releases. I mentioned before already that delivery optimizations used with WSUS. It will try to talk to the service on the internet. There is also a dual scan policy that gets invoked with a PC that's configured with those Windows Update for Business policies that we just talked about, that's pointing to WSUS. So if you configure the Windows Update for Business policies, which are actually used with WSUS and Config Manager as well to indicate CB versus CBB machines, but if you configure those and then you notice that your Windows 10 PCs are installing updates from WU instead of WSUS, that's why. This dual update policy kicks in when it sees those Windows Update for Business policies. It gets all the Windows updates from the Windows Update service directly, and it gets all the non-Windows updates from WSUS. That's less than optimal configuration for most customers, so we're changing that behavior in the creators update to make that more explicit. You had to explicitly say you want to do dual scan in order to enable dual scanning. We talked about Windows Upgrade Analytics earlier. It is useful to be able to see information about your environment and what applications are compatible, what applications aren't compatible before you go through this upgrade process. This is available in preview. It's a free service. You can sign up for it with an Azure subscription, which includes no costs either, so it is completely free. You just need to configure your PCs to report telemetry to us, and they have to be tagged with a unique identifier for your organization. Otherwise, that telemetry data is completely anonymous, and we don't know which organizations it belongs to. But once you have those pieces in place, Upgrade Analytics will show you the full inventory of the PCs in your environment, the full list of apps, the websites that are being visited, optionally, you can turn that on, the Office add-ins that are being used, optionally, that's something you had to turn on. So you can use that then to try to figure out which PCs are ready to deploy Windows 10 to or the latest feature update, which ones have issues that need to be remediated, and really to guide you through the upgrade process. So definitely check that one out. We went through that in more detail earlier this morning. Yeah, the question was what level of telemetry is required. It does require the basic level. If you're not familiar with Windows telemetry, there's a security level, a basic level, an enhanced level, and kind of the super level above that. So it does require only basic. If you talk to your account team, the information that's reported with the security and the basic levels is fully documented, so we can provide a document that goes through the full detail. And for most security organizations, the things that they are concerned about are kind of minor. They're concerned about the telemetry reporting computer names and application names. Obviously, we need the application names in order to provide some type of useful information around applications. So if it happens to collect an application name that would allow us to figure out that, oh, this application is used internally at Amazon or someone like that, they could have some concerns around that. The computer names, we don't really care about. The computer names are used primarily for IT, so that if you see a particular machine has an issue, it's nice to be able to tell which machine that is by name. So there are some customers who said, well, okay, but we don't want you to see our computer names. Okay, so we're looking at ways to potentially obfuscate that data so that we get a unique identifier, but it's not something that would be identifiable to be able to say which PC it was inside of your organization. Now, the telemetry does also report the configuration manager unique ID, so you can actually then synchronize between config manager and the Windows Upgrade Analytics service and make the ties to your existing inventory that way and see the PC link that way without the name. It's certainly not something that we would want to do intentionally. There just are some instances where it could happen accidentally. So yeah, our intention is to not show internal line of business apps to someone who happens to search the Ready for Windows site looking for it. But there's some intricacies around that we're still working through. The Ready for Windows site, if you haven't seen that one, is useful as well for finding support statements for ISVs, as well as to find usage information, which is what we were just talking about. If you haven't looked at that one, the readyforwindows.com takes you to this site where you can search for a particular application and then drill in to see a link to the support statement as well as usage information, where that usage information is coming from telemetry reported from those 400 million machines that are running Windows 10. If you see a version that says insufficient data, we don't see that particular version running on very many machines of those 400 million. If you see a version that says highly adopted, like the 10018 version, that's a pretty good sign that that app doesn't have any issues. If it's highly adopted, it's being used on a lot of machines, hundreds of thousands of machines, and as a result, probably not one you need to worry about. So definitely check that one out. That one doesn't require any subscriptions or anything like that. Just go out and search for whatever applications you want. We do have plenty of tools that are able to do upgrades. Windows Update obviously can be used to deploy feature updates to existing PCs. Windows Update for Business is really just a set of policies that sits on top of Windows Update to let you defer when those updates are deployed. WSUS can deploy feature updates as well, as long as it's running WSUS 4.0 or above. So this does require Server 2012 or 2012 R2 or 2016 running on your WSUS servers. And Configuration Manager with their current branch releases also support doing this either using task sequences or using the Windows 10 servicing capabilities. So let's shift then to talk a little bit about modern deployment. We used to call this provisioning. We are trying to adjust the terminology, primarily because the provisioning term has kind of gotten overused. There are plenty of different definitions, and also it tends to imply a certain path where we want to provide support for multiple paths. The basic idea is simple, where we want to be able to take a new PC off the shelf, transform it as easily and as simply as we possibly can into something that's ready for productive use. So that's the goal, but how we do that, there are multiple options. The middle one is what most people think of. We created a new tool called the Windows Imaging and Configuration Designer, Windows ICD, that creates a provisioning package that can then be copied out to the machine and installed onto the PC to apply a configuration to it. That's great, but it's IT driven. It requires IT to create the provisioning package, IT to deploy the provisioning package, IT to install the provisioning package. It's not something done generally by the end user. The cloud-driven scenario, though, is really designed for the end user to do directly themselves. So they can take a PC out of the box, plug it in, turn it on. It will ask a few simple questions like, what's your time zone? Is this a company-owned PC or a personal PC? And what's your email address and password? You put that information in, it enrolls the device in Azure Active Directory, enrolls the device in a mobile device management service, pushes the rest of the configuration down from the management service, that MDM service, and uses that to fully configure the device. That's the direction that we want to get to, that fully automated capability where you could just drop ship a brand new PC from Lenovo directly to the end user in the middle of Wyoming and just tell them, hey, here's your one-page sheet of instructions, walk through these steps and it'll set the PC up for you. That's what we want to get to so that we can get IT from having to be involved in that process other than configuring the MDM service with the policies and configuration that you want to push down. On the other end of the spectrum, there is a kind of a classroom scenario that we want to be able to enable teachers or school IT people or school pseudo IT people to be able to walk through a simple wizard that says, okay, I want to join this into my domain, I want to install these apps, I want to set up a shared PC mode, which we'll talk about in a minute, and they just walk through this wizard. This wizard is actually an app. There's an app in the store called Set Up School PCs. You run this application, it spits out a provisioning package onto a USB key, and then they just walk around to each new PC. During the initial startup, during UBI, hit the Windows key 5 times, insert the USB key, browse to that provisioning package, and configure that machine. So the idea is that someone with little or no IT experience could set up a room full of PCs within an hour or two. So that's the range of offerings from fully automated, cloud-based to kind of non-IT, with the middle one being the ICD tool. Now you may notice on this particular slide, it doesn't say Windows Imaging and Configuration Designer, it just says Windows Configuration Designer. We're going to rename it with the Creators Update because the imaging features are being taken out of it. Now it's solely a configuration tool. The imaging features were intended primarily for OEMs, but OEMs didn't use them. So if they're not going to use them, why are we even continuing to include them? So we've yanked those out, and we're focusing now just on the configuration pieces. So using Windows ICD, or soon to be WCD, we have added some new features. In ADK 1511, we added the ability to run PowerShell scripts and executables. In the ADK for 1607, we added some new simple wizards to let you create provisioning packages for some fairly common bootstrapping scenarios, and then moved everything else kind of into that advanced mode. We have deprecated the imaging features. They will disappear in the next release. And we've added shared PC mode, which we should talk about a little bit more as we get into this. But if you look at the tool, if I could type, these are the new simple configuration wizards that we want. So if we said we wanted to create a simple provisioning package, we just need to give it a name. and then fill in the blanks. To specify a computer naming pattern, an optional product key, the details for joining a wireless network if that's necessary, how to enroll into Active Directory, so put in your domain join details, and that's it. From that point, create the provisioning package and use that to set up the PCs. The school devices one is pretty much the exact same thing with one difference. You still have computer names, you still have wireless networks, still have Active Directory, but there's this setup school settings option. One of those is to configure devices for shared use. When you configure devices for shared use, the real goal is to support the classroom scenarios. Think about a school classroom where there's a shared cart of PCs. A student walks in at the beginning of class, they grab a PC out of the cart, a laptop, they log into it. What happens the first time you log into a machine on Windows 10? You see the pulsing screen, it says, please wait, we're setting up your machine, it's protecting you from the internet, all that good stuff. That can take on slower PCs like they have in schools with spinning hard drives, 5, 10, 15 minutes, depends on the speed of the PC. You can't have a student grabbing a different laptop every day and repeating that process every single day of the week until they've logged on once to every single PC in that cart. That just takes way too much of the classroom time. So shared PC mode was added to short circuit all of that. Instead, you sign in and it doesn't install the apps. It lets them sit there and installs them at first launch. So if a user clicks on an icon for a particular app, then it installs it. So there's like a half-second delay while that app is registered and then launches. Schools also need test-taking accounts, so you can configure that as well. You can put the machine into test-taking mode where it just runs a particular application, disables browsers and all other applications. So that's useful, but a simple wizard to create that as a provisioning package. Now, the advanced mode is still around, so you can still say, I want to create an advanced provisioning package for all or some SKUs, and then configure all the different runtime settings. But you'll notice all of the imaging features have been taken out of here because this is a later build that is already removing that imaging stuff. So that's ICD now. It will become CD. It will probably even be available via the Windows Store as a desktop bridge application to make it easier to install and for us to update. So that will be coming shortly. Now, shared PC mode, there is some work going on to do more logging and diagnostics. I haven't looked to see what the state of that is right now, but certainly that's a recognized challenge that it should provide more diagnostic details. Where are what features going to go? Oh, the imaging features? Well, for most enterprises today, the tools being used for imaging are the ADK, MDT, and Configuration Manager. So none of those go anywhere or change. It's just the imaging features of ICD weren't really being used, so as a result, they were dropped. If you're using anything else, you'll continue to use that something else.
For the scenario where you're drop shipping a retail computer somewhere, does that have to be a certain level of Windows 10 for that to work?
I mean, it works with Windows 10, 15, 11, and above. It gets better with each release. So with 16.07, they've added some additional capabilities. With the Creators Update, they'll add more capabilities. So it gets better over time, but they all support the scenario that enables you to enroll into Azure Active Directory and into an MDM service as part of the UBI process. They just keep tweaking the UBI process to try to simplify it more. Yes, it does require, well, partially. It does require Pro or Enterprise to do the full Azure AD join and MDM automatic enrollment. If you're using Home, Home supports adding a work account. So you can add a work account, which is an AAD account, and get automatic MDM enrollment that goes along with that, because Home does have MDM support. You just can't do an AAD join. Yeah, the question was, can you have it so that when you join with when you put in a work account, can it automatically take a Windows 10 Pro machine, turn it into Enterprise? Yes. We can't do Home. We had to have Pro as a qualifying OS. So you may have to go from Home to Pro, and then from Pro to Enterprise automatically. So what was I doing? Oh, shared PC mode. Let me switch over to a separate machine here. So I have a PC here with a provisioning package that I created using ICD, using that wizard that we set up before. I can install the shared PC provisioning package here. It tells me it's going to do some things to my machine. Yes, sure, go ahead and do that. It will then sign me out. As soon as it signs me out, it reboots the PC, and I think it reboots the PC. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see what happens. And after that, shared PC mode will be enabled. Now, shared PC mode tries to optimize that first login process so that instead of taking minutes, it only takes maybe 30 seconds on a particular PC. I mean, that's reasonable in a classroom for a student to grab a PC and log in, and while they're waiting for everything to calm down and the teacher to start up, it's logging them into the PC. So that helps greatly. Now that today works primarily with the school PCs. We haven't done a lot of testing yet in enterprise scenarios. We're looking at some scenarios around that. The challenge in the enterprise scenarios is the shared PC mode does things to the machine by default that enterprises probably don't want, like disabling the machine from going to sleep or from hibernating. Well, why does it do that? Well, imagine a stack of PCs on a cart that are sitting there plugged in overnight. The students come in the next day, all the machines went to sleep. They wake them up to sign in. What's the first thing they do? They install a patch and reboot. So much for productivity in the classroom. So by disabling sleep, you trade off a little bit of extra power to make sure that that patching and the reboot with the active hour setting that we talked about before enables that machine to patch and reboot overnight so that when the student comes in the next day, they can be productive. This always takes too long. We'll give it a moment here to see if it finishes up. There are some other things that are done as well. It automatically will maintain the user profiles on the machine. One of the other challenges with shared cart PCs is imagine a math classroom. Each period, a different group of kids comes in. So you've got, say, 40 people in a class, 7 classes a day. That could be 280 different user profiles on the machine. The machine can fill up with user profiles. So it will automatically clean off user profiles when the disk space gets low and also ones that haven't been used in an extended period of time. You can also configure it to prevent files from being saved locally on the machine, to force them to use OneDrive or other cloud services to save that so that they don't have any local state on the machine. It all stays in the cloud somewhere. So it's really designed for those scenarios. The advanced mode of ICD does include some options to turn those off, but it doesn't give you options to turn everything off. It sets some policy settings on the machine that you can probably override using GPO settings, but you would want to override those as part of the setup in an enterprise environment. We'll check on that in a minute. Let me continue on just because that's going to take a little bit. We talked about pre-installed software already. We don't have a good way to get rid of that bloatware yet. We are working on that with Windows 10 Creators Update coming out this spring. That will involve using a PC reset type process. That takes a while though. So you can take a new PC and reset it, and that reset will get rid of it. But as that takes about 30 minutes, that does slow down the provisioning process. So it's a question of how long are you willing to sit there and wait for this PC to provision itself. So it's still going to be better if you get the PCs from the OEM without that. Most of the OEMs will provide that as an option for you so that you don't need to remove it. You just get the PCs pre-configured without that. A few of the OEMs have moved to that by default, especially for their corporate models of PCs, so that you don't need to worry about that at all. They finally realized that extra few dollars of revenue from pre-installing that software isn't worth it if it makes their enterprise customers grumpy. So they do remove that for you. We have the ability as well to change the SKU. This kind of goes along with the earlier question. We have this new licensing program called Windows 10 Enterprise E3 for cloud service providers, Windows 10 E3 for CSP. That enables a user to get a subscription through a partner, and when they log in with an Azure Active Directory account that has a subscription tied to it, it will automatically go from Pro to Enterprise. If that subscription's taken away, the next time they log in, it will go from Enterprise back to Pro. That technology is designed for that CSP program. We're working on expanding that to enterprise scale, but in the meantime, it enables you to do the same thing from a command line. So you can take a Windows 10 Pro machine and change it to enterprise using a provisioning package, using an MDM policy, or just using slmgr.vbs. So let's take a look at that. Let me switch back over. First, this is the shared PC machine, so I can put in an ID. I need to remember my password here, which I think I've written down. So let me log in here as sales002@contosomn.com. So this is the first login, started at 15 seconds. Let's see how long this one takes. We're now at 10 seconds. 15 seconds. 20. 25. And there we have a desktop. So none of the pulsing blue screens, none of the extra time installing applications. When we look at the start menu, we can see all of the icons there, but if we were to actually choose one of these apps, like even if it was just Solitaire, you see the app gray out for a second. That's what happens when it's installing, and then it launches. So it doesn't take very long for those apps to dynamically install. But when you take that and multiply it by 20-something inbox applications, that's what's taking a longer period of time during that first login process. So that's why shared PC mode is cool. It makes that particularly quick. So let's look at the change SKU then. Let me switch over to a different machine here. I have a machine that if we were to run WinVer, it says that this is a Windows 10 Pro operating system. If I then run slmgr.vbs/IPK for install product key, and then give it the KMS setup key for enterprise, that key won't actually activate the OS, but it causes it to seek out a KMS server and activate from KMS. But that's enough to change the SKU. So I'll run that. It'll take a few seconds, pop up saying that it installed the key successfully. And then if I run WinVer again, now says Windows 10 Enterprise operating system. So it's an instantaneous change in SKU from Pro to Enterprise. I can even go the other direction by injecting a Pro key, and it will instantaneously go back down to Pro. So now Pro and Enterprise are the exact same bits. All of the features are pre-installed. It's just the product key, the SKU that's been activated, enables or disables the particular features that are used for that SKU. But that only works for Pro and Enterprise. It doesn't work for home. It doesn't work for education. It's just Pro to Enterprise and back again. But it does at least make that a very easy process. So you can take a machine that ships from the OEM with Pro And if you're using CSP, automatically step it up to enterprise. If you're using Config Manager or an MDM service, push down a product key or just run a script to change it over to the enterprise SKU. So really simple to do. We are working on ways to automate the AAD join process. Today, you had to do that manually by typing in the email address and password. We'll enable a token-based mechanism for doing that. That should be available in the creators update. We are working on PowerShell commands for installing and removing provisioning packages. They're actually in the current preview builds if you wanted to try them out. That will help take those provisioning packages and integrate them into existing task sequences so that you can start to leverage some of the capabilities of provisioning, but tie it into existing processes. On the traditional deployment side, we did release a new ADK with Windows 10 16.07. No big changes. It does fix most of the known issues with Config Manager. It added Office 2016 support to USMT. It added the AppV sequencer and the UEFI template authoring tools because those are now included in box in Windows 10, so we needed to put the admin tool somewhere, so we put them in the ADK. We updated the ICD tool that we already looked at, and we removed the AppCompat tool, most of the AppCompat toolkit. The shim creation tool is still there. The Compat administrator is still there, but the inventory and reporting tools have been removed because Windows Upgrade Analytics is the future way forward with those tools. The Microsoft Deployment Toolkit was updated later. It wasn't updated for Windows 10 16.07 because we didn't need to update it for 16.07, but we did update it in November with a version that gets rid of the year and update number. It seemed kind of silly to call it MDT 2013 Update 3, but calling it MDT 2016 or 2017 would have caused challenges with the support lifecycle for older versions, so it was easier to just drop the version off altogether. So now it's just the Microsoft Deployment Toolkit, and in order to tell what version, you just need to look at the build number. The current build number released is 8443, so it's MDT 8443. The next one that comes out, whatever the build number is at that point, you'd be able to differentiate by that. This was mostly a bug fix release, no new features being added in there. A variety of bugs have been addressed. There is a blog on the MS Deployment blog site that goes through the details of the bugs that were fixed. One of the items that you might notice is some changes for high DPI support. So if you've used MDT Wizards on a Surface Pro 4 or a Surface Book, it did all kinds of weird things to the fonts. Now it will fix the fonts and display them properly. You just will end up with a little bitty window on the screen. So it's not 100%, but it's better than it was before. Configuration Manager, they have their current branch model. They have 3 releases per year. They support each one of those for 12 months. For Windows 10, though, they only support the N and N-1 versions for any particular Windows 10 release. So Windows 10 16.07 only supports Config Manager 16.02 and 16.06. I think that's right. It might actually be 16.06 and 16.10 now that I think about it. No, it is 16.02 because 16.10 came afterwards. So you do need to stay reasonably current in order to support Windows 10. They do have a separate release preview process, so you can set that up in a lab and keep installing monthly builds to try out their new capabilities. They do have the 2 mechanisms for feature updates we already talked about. And they have removed one thing that really annoyed people for a long time. The OSD preserved drive letter variable caused weird things like you deploy Windows and it would end up running on Z:\/ or E:\/ or X:\/ Not anymore. Now it ignores that variable and it will always end up on C:\/ so that's a good thing. The sysprep changes I mentioned before, you can now sysprep an upgraded OS. I still don't think it's a good idea, but if you don't have the ability to automatically create a new image using MDT or something like that, you can use this to install an OS, upgrade it, sysprep it, recapture it. We can configure the taskbar now in Windows 10 16.07. So you can create an XML file with the layout that you want, drop it into C user's default app data local Microsoft Windows shell, and the next time a user logs in, that will be applied. It's a fairly flexible XML file that lets you replace the taskbar. It will let you append items to the taskbar. It will let you remove items from the taskbar. So fairly flexible to do. There's some documentation on the TechNet site that explains how to do that. If we look at the process itself, which machine was that? I think it's this one. I can't type. So I have a machine here in C user's default app data local Microsoft Windows shell. There's a file called layoutmodification.xml. This file says to pin additional items for paint and command prompt. So if we look at the PC today, it doesn't have paint or command prompt on the taskbar. If I log out, and then log back in again with that file in place, hopefully we see paint and command prompt added to the taskbar. So the XML file is a little finicky. You had to make sure you get it configured right, so use the TechNet example as a starting point and then edit the items that you want to put in there. But that does let you have a full configuration for that particular item. And since we are right at time, any questions that I haven't answered as we went along through this? If not, I'm going to pack up and try to catch a train. So thanks for attending. If there's anything else, you can probably figure out my email address. It was on the first slide as well. Send me an email note, and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. Thanks a lot.